we we will begin our recording of our Genesis studies for September the 4th, 2022. And so with that, we have been dealing with various things in Genesis, and we'll talk about a couple of them a little bit more. There was one thing that I had left out. I think I skipped over it previously, so I would like to go back to that. And let's see what we have here. Okay. So I want to go back to the text of all the way back to the beginning of this paper, I believe it is. Here, let's go on. Oops. No, where's our mean? No, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong paper. But what happens when you have too many papers that are all related to the same passage? And but we'll get there. So the point being this: when we had studied this, we looked at the relationship between the words of Genesis 1:27 and 28, where we had then God created the Adam, and this is my descriptive literal translation, shall we say. So God created the Adam. Adam means just basically human. So he created the Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created him. This is a third masculine singular pronoun because it's referring back to the noun Adam, which is masculine singular. So they have to agree in gender and number. The pronoun must agree with the noun it is referring to. So, and then in the third line, we had male and female. He created them, which tells us when we look at subject and verb, God created. Second line, he created exactly the same. Then we had with this, the Adam. The Adam is him, that is him, humankind. And them, so in the third line, he takes it from a singular to the plural, indicating there's a plurality. Well, keep in mind, Genesis 1:27 and 28, there are only two humans. There is a male and a female. And so thus, when he uses this terminology and he says he created them, he's talking about the male and the female. And then in the first line, he said he created them in his image. And the King James added in his own image. And that's okay, but they italicized it to tell us that it is not there in the Hebrew text, and it is not. So in his image, then in the second line, he clarifies the nature of that. It's not just in his image, anybody. It's in the image of God that he was created. And the third line told us that it was male and female who were created with that image. This is what we call a synonymous parallelism in the Hebrew text. God says the same thing virtually in three different ways, and they are not intended to be pulled out and separated and made something of without bringing out the rest of that parallelism. So all of these three lines were built by God, and that tells us another thing. When I'm saying these things, you already know I have told you the first four chapters of Genesis were written by Adam, and we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. But that's the issue. So if this device, this parallelistic writing was in the writing of Adam, then that means that the parallelistic device, this Hebrew poetic parallelism, as we call it nowadays, is a device that was built into Adam by God. And that means he intended Adam to use it, and he intended Adam to understand it, just as he would intend others to understand it as they read the things that Adam would write, or as anyone would write. This was not something that would be devised by man. And and man make up some kind of a poetic structure. It's like, wait a minute, that's a little bit of humanism, and not a little bit, it just flat out humanism. It's a glorification of humans over the God who exists. And that is not what this is. This is the design of God, and it was used by Adam. So we saw that was significant. And then the very next thing we saw, then God blessed them. And the very next thing is, then God said to them. So in this blessing, we get the idea, and we have this idea, well, so God created them, and now God blessed them. And it's like, when we pronounce a blessing, you say, oh God, well, yes, Lord, would you please bless this meal, or bless this dog, or bless this activity that we're going to do. And God, we're going to do what we want to do, but we want you to bless what our actions are. God doesn't work that way. So when God blesses, the blessing of God is contingent upon our conformity to his design. We can be as religious as we want to. We can claim to be this, that, and the other, and we can even claim that this is what I believe the scripture said. It doesn't matter what you believe the scriptures to say. What matters is what the scriptures actually said. That is what God actually intended to communicate with the scriptures. And we would do well in our churches to turn our hearts to learning to know what God said as he said it. But nowadays we have too many pastors and missionaries and evangelists and Bible college teachers and seminary professors, and we're too busy to study like that. It's too much work. So instead of doing the work and learning what God actually said, we do this other work by trying to listen to other men. We would rather listen to other humans than we would to the God who exists. And that tells you that many of us are very humanistic in our seekings. We are not seeking God. We are not seeking to understand him and what he has said. So therefore, because we're not seeking, we are not finding, and it is evident in the life of our people in our churches. Excuse me just a moment. Very good. Thank you, dear. So now, as we talked about this was Genesis 1:27 and 28. And then when we get over to Genesis 5:1 and 2, and I have said different times, the very first verse says, this is the record of the origins of Adam. This is the book of the generations of Adam. So that's what he's talking about here. But it's not talking about what follows. It's talking about what has already been recorded. You see, when you think about when he says in Genesis 5:1, he says, this is the record, that is the book, the Sefer, which is an account of the generations. The generations are how the Adams came into existence. It's their origin, how they originated. And Genesis 1-4 says very clearly, they originated by being created by God, and then tells a little bit about how sin or violation came into the system of God, and how all other things, all the alienations and things that we know between individuals, and how we like to decide for ourselves, just as Adam did, just as Cain did, how God should accept our worship. We need to we want to be able to decide good and evil for ourselves, and we do that, and God says, no, you don't. And yet we think we are accomplishing something. So that's this first verse. This exists, the record of the origins of Adam. That applies to Genesis 1-4. It is not saying that chapter 5 is the record of the origins of Adam. that it's going to be subject to the Adam, subject to that origin, and they're going to be descendants that are going to be mentioned. But and one of the things that tells us that this is by a different hand, the first hand, Adam, is the one who wrote over here in Genesis 1:27 and 28. But on the other side, when we get into Genesis 5, where we had God created the Adam in his image, the corresponding statement, in the day of the creating of God, Adam, or in the day God created Adam. Well, very, very similar statement, but it's not worded quite the same way. And it's not in a full synonymous parallelism like the original is over here in 1:27 and 28. But the second line, extremely similar. In the likeness of God, he made him. We had in the image of God, he created him. So you can see likeness and image. We saw God said, I will make man in our image and according to our likeness. So it's going to be that way. So then we have male and female, who he created them. Then this one says male and female, he created them. Essentially identical. Now, the point being the difference, and one more point, God blessed them, and the same thing over here. Then God blessed them. This is not a copy, if you will, somebody trying to write the same thing and just wrote it differently. That's not the issue. And this is the kind of thing that could have arisen if humanity had been dependent upon oral transmission. That is Adam, and this is the problem. This is where we get into a lot of evolutionary thought in our churches. It's presented in our churches because we don't know. We have people saying, well, you know, God revealed Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and he revealed all of that to Moses, and that became the book of Moses, and all of that was written by Moses, and it was all miraculously done. And that is simply not true. There was never a record of Moses that belonged to Moses. Moses knew what he was doing. He was a godly man. He wasn't making up something to say, oh, see how great I am? He was adding to the record which God had begun with his first man, Adam. And that record had been being kept, and it would continue to be kept as Moses and others would add to that record. And it comes down to us, all the way down, even to us in this day. And when you think about it, if this was the record of God, then who was responsible for preserving and protecting it? Was man then this non-finite or this finite human being? Was he the one who's responsible to make sure that nothing happens to the record? Or was God the one who was behind all of it, and he assured that it was preserved and it was passed down, it was transmitted through the generations? And we would see that. We mentioned that there were verses that indicate that there was not a book, there was the book. Not a record, there was the record. And God is one who spoke that very wording. So we're not going to go over there now. But point being, what we have here, when we look at these two things, and let me go back up just a little bit and catch this. So you need to catch the significance. So when you consider this literal comparison of Genesis 1:27 and 28 to Genesis 5:1 and 2, the similarity of the terminology is unmistakable, including the fact that the word likeness in 5:1 is directly from Genesis 1:26. The similarity of terminology, however, does not obscure certain differences in structure, especially the use of the Hebrew infinitive construct phrases in the second. That is the Genesis 5:1 and 2 passage. And so now you've been getting something from from Rebecca. Dr. Miller has been teaching you some things about Hebrew, and you look at these things and you hear about Hebrew verbs, and well, this is a perfect, that's completed action, and this is an imperfect, that's incomplete action, and oh my, who cares? And oh, and this is a PL, and that's a PUAL, and oh no, and this is a NIFAL, and who cares about all of this stuff? Let me tell you, God cares about it because it's the language that God built into Adam, and it's the language that God chose for recording his message all the way up to the time of Christ, when people would begin using the Greek text. But it was God's choice. And if you think man can do anything better than God, then quite simply, you don't know God accurately. You may think man did better by coming up with an English version or a Spanish version or a German version or something, but if you think anything like that, or if you let that kind of thinking influence your perspective of the scriptures, then you are not knowing God and his relationship to the scriptures accurately. It is you have to realize the scriptures are not a product of human activity. They're the product of holy men of God who were moved, borne along by the Holy Spirit of God to provide this record so we would have it now. And so we would have it and we'd be able to trust it, absolutely. But that kind of thing has not been being shared in our churches. And we have a lot of people, we just do stuff. We just do. We go to church because we want to hear the music or we want to sing some songs, and we're going to sit there and let the preacher berate us, and tell us this and that and the other, what we need to do, but we're not going to learn anything. Oh yeah, well, we say, well, I'm not familiar with that passage, but we sit with the entire Word of God on our laps, and then we let somebody tell us what he thinks God would have him share with us on this day. Where's the Word of God the rest of the week in our lives? Something is wrong. But looking at these two passages, Genesis 1:27-28 and 5:1 and 2, the first, Genesis 1:27-28, it appears to be the record of a first hand. That is, this is someone who received or saw and recorded the original account, and that would have been Adam. And the second, Genesis 5:1 and 2, appears to be the record of a second hand. That is, one who calls attention to the original account. Just like when we quote John 3:16, we say, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever, that is Ken Sheets, whosoever believeth in him, that if Ken Sheets would believe in him, he would not perish but have everlasting life. And you say, oh, you misquoted it. No, I didn't misquote it. I applied it as I intended it to be used. And that's what this second hand did. He was calling attention to the validity and the foundational truth that was in that first account. He's bringing it over into another time after that. And then he is giving it its significance by reiterating that content of that original account without intending to copy it. He miscopied. He didn't miscopy because he wasn't trying to copy. He was bringing that account over into another situation. He's applying it, and he's bringing it up into our attention again by reiterating that content. So, seen in this manner, the original account would have been that which was written by Adam. The second would have come from the hand of the first man to whom Adam entrusted the keeping of the record, and that would have been Seth, his faithful son. This is exactly the case. So now, what I want us to look at, though, is here. Then God blessed them, and the very next statement is, then God said. So what this tells us is that immediately upon having been created. And it's kind of interesting because in the Genesis 1:27-28, the blessing seems to include, and doubtless it does, the idea that God spoke to them, God said something to them. That means that they possessed the ability to receive language and to interpret and understand it perfectly as it was intended to be understood. And they had that ability immediately upon having been created. You go over to the record of Seth in Genesis 5:1-2, and he continues just like the original Adam's writing did. So he says, then he blessed them, but then Seth says, then he called. So this tells us that God spoke to Adam and Eve, and he called their name, literally the name of them. And there were only two of them at this time. And he called the name of them, and what did he call them? Adam. Remember the word that we saw that was up in God created the Adam. There's the exact same word, Adam, in his image. When Seth wrote and referred back to that, he said, in the day of the creating of God, what did God create? The Adam. There's Adam, same word. So God called the name of them Adam. Do you realize that means God spoke directly to them? And shall we say, it'd be like you naming your child or something and say, I'm going to call you Freddie. And because God put that name on them, that would be it. But God called them by name, and you get that idea that he called. He didn't just get back and, well, maybe, let's see, he spoke to them through their minds, the kind of stuff like you see on Idiot Aliens, or no, that's not Idiot Alien. It's some other, or some one of these tricky things or something like that you see on TV and all. And this being is speaking to the mind. Do you know what? Demons can speak to your mind. Yes, demons can speak to your mind. Demons can influence you if you remain open to them. That's why we must, that's why he said, through Paul, said, you must resist. You must resist. We actively resist, and we say no. And as Paul said in another place, we bring every thought into the captivity of Christ. We have to resist the devil. And when we resist the devil, when we resist demonic spirits, then they must flee from us because they cannot overcome the Spirit of God who is in us. But the issue is, in this case, that when this happened, God called. He did not just speak to their mind and say, now you all are going to be called humans or Adam. What he did, he actually called out. So you have God actually speaking. So the nature of what Adam said when he said, then God blessed them, then God said to them, Seth says the same thing. Then God blessed them, then he called the name of them. In other words, it wasn't a speaking to the mind, it was something that he spoke outwardly. This also means Adam and Eve possessed the ability to take the sounds of language into their minds and to be able to understand and apply the language properly. They already knew. They were fully formed with full linguistic abilities. They didn't just have this sense of something coming to them. They could understand a language. That means they knew alphabet. They knew words. They knew pieces of words and all these things. They knew how they were to be put together, and they did it. So when you think about that, there's that similarity, but the difference in the wording tells us. And when Seth writes it, he says, then he called the name of them Adam. And he did it. When did he do it? In the day of the, wow, that's interesting word too. In the day of the causing creation of them. So just like at the top, Seth began in the day of the creating of God, Adam. When he ends it, he goes down in the day of the causing creation of them. And you can see the creating of God is a causing of creation. It was done by God. It was an act of the Creator himself. And you can see the Adam here refers to both the Adam and his wife, Eve, Hawa, we would say in Hebrew. And here they are in the same plural form down here, if you will. So where Adam would be a collective, taking in Adam and Eve here. And keep in mind, Adam became the name of the man. That's why we still to this day say Adam. But it became the name of the man. But it also is the name of what they are. They are humans. So now let's consider something here. And let's think about what would be the nature of this blessing. Why? I mean, in both of these accounts in Genesis 1:27, 28, and 5:1 and 2, the very next thing after God created them, the scriptures say, then God blessed them. What about this idea of blessing? What is blessing? Well, thought you'd never ask. So let's go over here to another paper. And this paper is related to cursing and blessing and the nature of their relationship, that is cursing and blessing, to God and his design. So, and subtitle, humans do not determine the nature of blessing and cursing. Only God possesses the ability and authority to do so. So now let's look down in this document a little bit and we'll talk about some of the things here. And keep in mind, this is why when you think of blessing and cursing, you do not think of blessing and cursing from any evaluation on the human level. You must think of blessing and cursing as already having been established by the person of God. He's already established these things. And I've mentioned previously that when God built the creation, he built a system. He did not leave to humans to decide good and evil for themselves. He had already built the system, and the system responded appropriately to his design, and thus we experience good and evil by our response to his design. So follow with me for just a moment. Humans have devised the word curse to describe those conditions by which one being intends to bring harm or some other undesirable experience upon another being. One person curses another person or thing when he has become so dissatisfied with that other person or thing that he expresses, whether in words or actions, his desire for something harmful, something bad to happen to the person or thing which has brought his dissatisfaction. Certainly cursing may take different forms, but the central issue is that cursing originates from the inner man of the person pronouncing the curse. That is, every expression of cursing originates in the heart and mind of the individual. It is rooted in his own personal ideas, those ideas already existing in his mind regarding what is acceptable to him for his life and interactions with everything around him. And boy, in this day and age of such selfishness and self-centeredness, you can see the effects of all of this. Let's go on. He knows what he likes and dislikes. He knows what is desirable and undesirable to him. And when those standards, his own personal set of ideas regarding what is good and bad, are violated or just appear to be violated, by someone or something else, then his emotional response, however wrong it might be, drives him to express his displeasure with whatever object is displeasing him. Thus, whether outwardly or only inwardly, he pronounces a curse on that object. And the nature and extent of the curse is whatever he himself thinks is appropriate in the matter at hand. So accordingly, cursing is an action that is intensely personal and individual. That is, it is rooted in the very depths of the inner person and that person's evaluation of what is right and proper. The difficulty arises, however, from the fact that humans are finite, limited, lacking in knowledge and understanding, unable to see beyond the perspective they have learned and developed up to any specific point in life. For humans, these limitations make their cursing in almost every case to be an expression of their own selfishness and self-focus. The cursings then of humans bear the effects of their humanity. If life has seemed to be good, challenging, but bearable, and they have been taught to view others from a loving and unselfish perspective, then they tend to be more free with forgiveness and understanding. On the other hand, if life has seemed to be bad, challenging, and unbearable, and they have been taught to view others from hateful and selfish perspective, then they tend to be more demanding of punishment and accountability. The issue which arises is that humans, whether they see life as good or bad, tend to view God as relating to humans very much as they themselves do. That is, God curses or blesses very much from the same perspectives which they apply to such matters. But God is not human, and the imposing of human perspectives on the Creator is a practice of grave error. In any evaluation of the seeming opposites, cursing and blessing, or loving and hating, an interpreter must keep in mind the unfalse, unchanging person and nature of God. You see, now I'm going back. This is where what I've said so many times. You've got to have a right view of the person and nature of God. And you don't change the right view of the person and nature of God to fit your ideals through time. He remains unchanged. He does not change. He cannot be false. And thus, now think about it. Thus, if God is love, then his relationship to everything must be considered from that perspective. For any human to attribute to God a characteristic that is inaccurate is for that human to act as a false teacher to others. Now, what about the nature of God's cursing? The consequences which humans experience in their deviations from God's design has been termed cursing, but this term is much misunderstood. The nature of cursing lies in its relationship to the chesed of God. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The criteria of his design. So when you think of the chesed of God, you think about the criteria of his design. I was talking to someone recently, and this person was saying that whenever you go to a passage of scripture or anything that happens, you've got to be thinking in terms of that God always begins from a perspective of mercy. And I did not get into an issue with that person at that time, but my first thought was, as soon as he said mercy, and I thought, no, he doesn't, not mercy. That's not the first way he comes at it, if you will. It's that he always comes at every situation that could ever exist from the perspective of who he is in his person and nature, and what are the criteria of his design. And within those criteria of his design, mercy is an integral aspect, but you don't put mercy ahead of the design. You put the design first, and you know that mercy and love and everything else is all a part of that design. So we like to make God according to what we want him to be. So that what this may be, cursing may be defined as the experience, catch this, the experience of trying to operate life successfully while violating the Creator's basic design criteria for its operation. Stated differently, cursing is the pursuit of a successful, valuable existence by following the criteria of designs which contradict God's perfect design and order. We talk about many things. It's Stephen, I know you're on here right now. We've talked about different things. People trying to do things with computers and information systems and all kinds of things like that. And people will try to make a system do something that it was never designed to do. It's got to be designed. There's got to be some element of the design in it before it can do something. You can try to make it do something. You could take a saw and try to use a saw as a hammer, and you may actually succeed in driving a very small nail, but a hammer's designed to do so much more. Things are designed a certain way, and if you think man can design things for specific operations and functions and interactions, then what can God do? What has God done? He has built a creation, and it is all designed to function and interact, to operate according to certain criteria. And those criteria are expressions of his person. They are perfect and exact expressions of his person. And so when you think about this, you can see what must be done. And when we try to operate a creation built by this God, and we're going to operate with it, no, we don't want to work it that way, God. We're going to work it our own way. It's like saying, just like Cain said, yeah, I know God, you wanted a sacrifice, so I gave you a sacrifice. But I don't want to give you the one that you said. I want to give you the one that I think you should be satisfied with. And then we wonder why cursing results. So does God come down and say, oh, Ken Sheets, you did that wrong. I'm going to curse you. Oh, you over there. Oh, I'm going to curse you. Oh, I'm going to have to curse you. Oh, you over there, I'm going to bless. That is absolute stupidity. He doesn't have to do that. He's already built the system. And when we experience cursing, it's because we're trying to operate life successfully while violating the Creator's basic design criteria for the operation of life. Now, these criteria of violation are many, and they vary constantly. As humans continually seek to devise some set of criteria for life, which appear to actually bring success in life. Humans are always trying to adjust the right and wrong so that it fits, so everything is right or everything is wrong that they like to be right or wrong. Well, you can't do that. It's already established by God. And yet they want to do this, and all the while they want to be released from their accountability to God. Because of these criteria of violation have originated in the finite minds of humans and are contradictory to the Creator's design, they can never produce the desired result. Deviation from God's perfect design can never bring the benefits which the Creator designed life to produce. But those who deviate are destining themselves to a life of always trying to manipulate the design to produce a semblance of success, where success can never be achieved. That is, such a person is actually destroying himself. And that's that idea. That's what John 3:16 and many other verses said. So that they would not perish, but you look at the word perish, and it is a middle voice verb in Greek, and it means that basically that the person would not perish himself or make himself perish. That's the idea. And when we try to operate life according to a design that is not in accord with God's design, then we're the ones doing the destroying of ourselves. God already built a system. He's already made a way that works, and it works perfectly. The issue is, will we seek to walk in that design and operate life according to that? So if you don't, you experience the negative results. That is what we call cursing. Now, and we're going to skip over the verse here today for the moment, but you can see this is where he said, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you. Notice life and death. And then look at the correlation. Life and death, blessing and cursing. Life, blessing, death, cursing. You can see the correlation very, very directly there in that text. So deviation from God's design, whether on a momentary basis by a believer, and believers do deviate, or on a habitual basis by an unbeliever, is actually a denial of God's person. Though many claiming to believe God think that they can believe and accept God in some aspects of life while denying him in others, the Creator's person cannot be believed or accepted in part. You see, this is why we have so many people in our churches, good people who are experiencing a lot of bad things because they accept the Creator's person in part. They believe and they want to go to heaven, and they believe in Christ, and they believe he's the way, but that's as far as they go. They don't want to learn anymore. They know enough to get to heaven, and they got their little cottage in the corner of glory, and that's all they need, and they don't need to learn anymore, and they're not going to give themselves to learning anymore. They believe in the Creator in part, but you have to realize either he is the transcendent Creator to whom man owes not only his obedience, but his very existence, or that man and woman is functioning in this partial belief mode, a mode bringing only destruction. In a creation filled with the Creator's own constantly reiterating testimony of his inexorable value, the failure to acknowledge God as who and what he is in accord with what he has revealed of himself constitutes a rejection of him. The individual who deviates and never accepts God's gracious, freely given revelation of himself and his design ultimately experiences the Creator's confirmation of that person's choice to reject and be consigned to everlasting punishment for that rejection. So you think about it. Notice that this person ultimately experiences the Creator's confirmation of that person's choice to reject and to be consigned to everlasting punishment for his rejection. God doesn't have to come down and say, oh, you've been bad, I'm sending you to the lake of fire. His system already operates. Yes, the system's built by him. It's an expression of his perfect person, holy and righteous. He is God. He's the transcendent Creator. Now, that's the idea of what cursing is. But when God blessed Adam and Eve, so what is it that he did? Let's look at blessing and then talk about that. So the consequence of adhering to God's design has been termed blessing. But this term, too, is much misunderstood. The nature of blessing lies not so much in its results, but in its relationship to the criteria of God's design. And it may be defined as the experience of operating life in full accord with the Creator's very good design. Stated differently, blessing is the pursuit of a successful existence, valuable in the most absolute sense, by following the criteria of the Creator's perfect design and order, and the experiencing of a personal relationship with the Creator, a relationship that is free of alienation, and knows experientially all the good that God intended human life to be. Blessing does not exclude being affected by the violations and undesirable experiences associated with living in a fallen world. It does, however, guarantee an existence characterized by the direct personal involvement of the Creator as He interacts and actively controls every situation of life and its consequences. The one who adheres to His design experiences the result which He has determined, whether or not that individual personally acknowledges Him in that result. And there are many people who experience the result of violation and of conformity, and they do not acknowledge God in the result. Truth and honesty have their rewards even in a fallen world. Proper application of physical laws produce a measure of success in the physical realm for anyone. Religion, too, can be of value in helping some to acknowledge God, if that religion does not stray too far from the truth. The criteria of God's design actually work, and they work, listen, they work independently of the man or the situation, regardless of the perception of those involved, because God is personally, actively ensuring the result. Adherence to God's design means a total acceptance of all aspects of His person, no part being accepted. He cannot be God and then suddenly cease to be present, as if He left the room or became preoccupied with some other situation. He, and thus His design, are always present, and the person who walks accordingly acknowledges Him as He is and ultimately receives His righteous sentence to be with Him in eternal blessedness. And we can see that in Proverbs as well. Humans may indeed bless God and other beings in the creation, but the nature and content of that blessing is defined. Listen, you don't just bless things. Your blessing is defined, just as is everything else in existence, by the criteria of the Creator's perfect design for all that exists. You may pronounce a blessing on someone that you think is a blessing, or that person thinks is a blessing, but if it is not in conformity to the criteria of the Creator's perfect design, it is not blessing, and there is no middle ground. It will be either blessing or it will be cursing. It will be either constructive to the design of God, or it will be destructive to the individual experiencing it. Because God never changes any aspect of Himself or His design in the least way, and because He cannot be false in any way or to any degree, for the blessing of any human to be blessing in the eyes of God, the content of that blessing must be in complete conformity to His person and nature as He has actually revealed Himself, including inseparably a complete conformity to who and what that human is as a created being in relation to Him. Thus, the design of God is the defining and governing criteria in all its increments and aspects in regard to determining whether blessing God is true blessing or whether it is just another imposing of mankind's humanistic thinking on the person of God. Individuals then who seek or claim to bless God must be careful to maintain their every thought in complete conformity to His perfect person and nature, seeing Him, themselves, and all other things of the creation as He has created them and designed them to function and interact with one another. Thus, blessing can never contain any aspect or any degree of selfishness or self-importance. True blessing sees all that exists accurately and relates it all exactly as He, the Creator, relates it. So, one of the earliest texts of God's record describes his creation of his human creatures, what we're talking about here, clearly indicating the nature of blessing as he defines it, and thus the inseparable relationship between blessing and the criteria of his design. In the Creator's own description of his creation of humans, immediately after he brought his first two human creations into existence, he blessed them and then he spoke to them, expressing in his words the content of his perfect design for their existence. Those words, expressions coming directly from his person, were expressions of his own perfect person and nature. And thus, God himself inseparably connected his blessing to the criteria of his design. Then, too, because God's expressions of himself are not limited to verbal speech, but include everything that he does in any way, his blessing is inseparably interrelated with everything that he does, however he chooses to do it. This means that his blessing and his interactions with everything in creation are inseparably integral to one another, making his every interaction a blessedness, and every blessedness an expression of his interaction. Humans may then bless God and other beings of the creation, but if their blessing, regardless of what they think in regard to what they are doing, is not in perfect accord with God's revelation of himself and his design, then such blessing is not blessing at all, but is the exact opposite and includes the exact opposite results. And that's why when God said that he created the Adam, and then in the very next statement says he blessed them, and the very next statement says he spoke to them. And he told them, one of the things he told them, what they were. He gave them a name, and then he began to tell them other things about their existence. And everything that he told them was in perfect accord with his person. And it was giving details, more details and more details of who they were in relationship to him and how they were to operate his creation. Remember, they were images and likenesses. So they were in the image and likeness. And if I may, let me go to this for just a moment. And you remember we talked about this idea that, and we'll go down here and then come back up. So when God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, the wording there, the word image, is this word selon, like a TS, selon. It's a representation. They were representatives of God to the creation. They did not possess the power and the authority of God, but they were to represent him within the bounds of the power and authority that he delegated to them. But they were always to think, we're representing God. So the design of God, we say we are now ambassadors for Christ. Well, what does that mean? That means you represent him to everyone else in the world. It's the same thing. And it didn't just come into existence in the New Testament. God made man. He made woman in his image, to be a representation of him to everything that exists, to be a likeness of him. That is, we are his representatives. We're expressing him to everything, and we express him exactly, accurately to who he is, to everything that exists. And he began telling man and informing man of the nature of that image and the nature of that likeness in the very day when he brought them into existence. And he did it and communicated with them in perfect, complete linguistic ability. And it was not just this, woo, that is idiocy. And yet that's what our screen culture and all of this humanistic culture we have out there, that's the way they present it. But that's not God. He spoke to them and he told them, and he did it in a worded presentation, and he's still doing the same thing. And that design, consider that design, that we would be in his image, that we would represent him. That is still the same design, that we would be a likeness of him to everything else around us. That is still his same design. It has never changed. We have a problem with our, as we call it, sin nature, our propensity to violate. But the design of God has never changed. Consider now, consider if his design for us to represent him and to be a likeness of him in this world, if it has never changed, and if we were to say, oh God, help me to know you. Oh God, I want to learn of you. Oh God, I must know you as you are so that I can represent you accurately. What is God going to do in response to such a prayer? It is his design. And when we express our recognition of that design, and we say, God, that's what I want to be. I want to be what you wanted me to be. I want to be what you designed me to be. Will you help me? What is God going to do when we ask to do exactly what he has said, what he has designed us to be? And it's in male and female alike. Now, one of the things that I did not cover, I don't recall anyway, perhaps I mentioned it, but is this idea when he had said that the creatures were all going to be, they were going to be in their different kinds, the word a kind. And it's interesting, but follow with me here for just a minute. This is brief. So in perfect accord with his perfect person and design, I like to put the word perfect on the creator, you can tell. On the sixth day of his creation activities, God first brought into existence all the various kinds of living creatures, which would walk and creep about on the earth. And we can see that. We saw that and mentioned it as we went through that passage. Just prior to this, he distinguished each kind of these living creatures as and this is not a mine, M-I-Y-N. The I-Y is pronounced like a long E. So this is a mean. And you can see the Hebrew here. If you took the Y out of mean, you would have men. And the word men in Hebrew is a preposition. It basically means from or out of something, as though something would be a source for something. So I could say, I come from Virginia. That is, I come min Virginia. That is where I originated, and thus I have come from Min, Virginia. Well, this word, when you put that extra Y in there, so to speak, when he says this is a mean, that's what these kinds were. They were the original sources. They were the original origins. They were kinds from which all the varieties of that kind would derive. Like we'd say, there were kinds of dogs and kinds of cows and kinds of I guess there were kinds of snakes even, and all kinds of other things, but there were kinds that were all related, and they could vary a little bit, but they were still, there was a basic kind, a kind of cats, a kind of birds, if you will, and things like that. So there were all of these different creatures, and they all had a mean, that is a kind, from which all their varieties would derive. So and then we talked about this a little bit before, but when the Adam saw this, listen, Adam knew language and he knew how to use it. And we're going to see it when we go into chapter 2. When Adam was put to sleep by God, and God took that rib or from his side, and he built the female Adam. Adam called her Isha. He was Ish, and she was Isha. He took this, what we call a feminine ending, and he put it on the end of the word for him, which was Ish. That would be a male individual. And he put the the feminine ending, on the end of it, and made her Isha, which would be a female individual. But keep in mind, both were Adams, both of them. And so they were designed and constructed by God to bear a unique relationship to him. No other creature bore the image and likeness of God in the way that the Adams were built, and with an authority. It was non-existent in any other being, even those in the angelic realm. And angels can represent God. They can go and do things, but they obviously, for those who have violated, there is no repentance. There's no turning. There is no salvation for them. We are in a very special category. And there's a whole lot more about angels, but we're not going to go there. So now, let's go to one other thing. We've got a few minutes here. I want to point out something else to you. So, typically we think in terms of, we're going to leave that. Let's go to here. I want to point out a little bit to you here. All right. What you're looking at now, and you say, oh my. Now, let me tell you, do not say, oh my, I could never understand that. Yes, you could. If you say you could never understand it, then you never will. You're right. You will prove yourself to be right by having a wrong perspective and by rejecting what God has given you as an ability to do. And you will experience the destructive result when you do that. But this is not something you cannot figure out. But and especially with someone helping you. Now, you don't have to worry about the first column over here, the first two columns, where I've got 2 Peter 5, and I'm indicating the preachers of righteousness, where Peter had referred to Noah, and he said, 8th Noah, a preacher of righteousness. He was not talking about him being 8th on the ark, but the 8th preacher of righteousness. And that is exactly what he was. And when you take the listing and you start with Adam, and then the next oldest godly man would have been Seth, next oldest Enos, next oldest Canaan, and they're passing the record down from each one. Enoch died at 365. He went for a walk with God and didn't come home. And so then Methuselah comes along. He's the son of Enoch, but his son dies 5 years before he did. Methuselah didn't die until the year of the flood. And that's a whole new statement we'll get into when we look at his name in a little bit later. But the 8th one would have been Noah, just exactly as Peter would write some 2,500 years later. So it would be interesting. But the point being this, when we look at this, and you can see up here, I've got, let's see if I can do this. Okay, you can see where I'm trying to move the cursor up here, and I'll go a little bit larger. We don't need to see a lot of the details there. But up here, you can see creation. And I have my calculation of creation is 4166. That would be year 0. That would be the very first year of when Adam and Eve were created on day 6. So, excuse me a moment. Now, if we go across, and you can see, and I put Cain and Abel in here. I don't know what years they were exactly, but we know that by the time Seth is born, Abel has already been slain. So Abel is already dead. and then we go on, and we have the names. The ones in gray are the sons of Cain, or shall we say descendants of Cain, and the ones that are in the larger letters: Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah finally down here in the year 1052 being born. And so we can see all of that. But the point being, you look down this and you think about when Adam died, Adam dies at 930 years old. Seth was already 800. Enos was 696. Canaan was 606. Mahalalel was 537. Jared, 472. Enoch was still alive. As a matter of fact, 311 years old. Methuselah was 246. And Lamech, his son, was already 59 years old. The only one of the pre-flood patriarchs, so to speak, that had not yet been born was Noah, who would be born, think about it, from the year 930 up to the year 1052. He would be born 122 years after Adam died. But all of the others were still alive. And all of these men would have known and would have been interacting with one another as they desired. And you have to stop and think about the nature of the earth and everything that time. We can't go there at the moment, but you think about this. So if Adam records, the last thing Adam records in his record at the end of chapter 4 is this: the birth of Enos, the son of Seth. So Adam records up through the birth of Enos. And then he apparently does not record anymore. We saw that in Genesis 5:1 and 2, that a second hand, someone else, his son Seth, took over writing in the record. Adam had begun the record, but then Seth would have taken over. Seth would keep it all the way up until he dies, basically, or he keeps the responsibility. Adam kept responsibility till he was 930, but Seth could have done the writing. We call it an amanuensis, someone who writes for someone else. Now, so you would have that. Now, if you look, Seth would keep the record for a long period of time. And keep in mind, when you know you're going to be passing the record, or you're going to be passing something to your son or to someone else, you don't wait until you die and say, "Good luck, Charlie." You begin training and you begin developing that person, and you ensure that he's ready to take over. And so there will be no break in what needs to be done. And these men were godly men. They knew what to do. They weren't seeking human wisdom. They were seeking the wisdom of God. They have this record that they're passing down, and it's called, this is the record of the origins of the Adams. That was the first 4 chapters. And then in chapter 5, we're going to go into all these others all the way down to Noah. But now think about this a moment. So all this information is there. And what we tend to do is we tend to do this. We tend to say, well, and this is what is said by a lot. A lot of people will say, well, now you notice I'm going on down through history. There's the flood. Well, there's the dispersion at Babel. I don't like to call it the Tower of Babel. I called it the dispersion at Babel. And then there's the birth of Abraham, the death of Noah. Noah lived 950 years, 350 years after the flood. And then we keep going, keep going. Wow, there's the birth of Isaac and the birth of Jacob, the birth of Joseph. And we get, oh, wow, look down here. And we get down to the birth of Moses in 1526. It has now been 2,640 years since creation. But keep in mind, Moses, the one who is the author of the books of Moses, the Pentateuch, he did not begin to write when he was a baby. He did not begin to write when he was in Egypt the first 40 years, apparently. We have no idea that he did that. But we do have an idea he would have known something about it, because he does identify with the Hebrew people in Egypt. But then he's not going to lead the Exodus until the year 2720, which was 1446 BC. It will have been 2,720 years since creation when most of his writing will be done in Exodus and so forth. So during the Exodus, I should say. Now, consider for a moment. People say that Moses received all of the information, the law and Genesis, as direct revelation from God. That means Moses wrote in the mindset of a person who lived 2,700 and some years after creation. He would have a mindset of someone who lives 2,700 years after creation. He would have the vocabulary of someone 2,700 years after creation. He'd have the alphabetic or the linguistic abilities of somebody at that time. He would have he would know all of these words and all these phrases, and he'd have all of this and everything before that. This is what we were told for years. We were told, well, it was all passed down by oral transmission. It was all passed down from one person. One person told a story to another, and they told a story. Listen, think about what that did. You did not hear that concept originally from any truly godly individual. Many, many men may have said it. I said it myself. But I was wrong, because I was mimicking what I had heard from other men. And I thought that's what you got to believe, because if you don't believe that, you're a heathen and all that stuff. But use your brain. When Moses comes along, he knows already a history of a people all the way through the first 2,700 years. And it was not all being passed down by oral transmission. Notice this, and we'll stop today. But notice, I want to go back across here. We get back here. Here is, we're going to go back even further. Not long after Babel, in the year of somewhere in around 2400 to 2300 BC, just about 100 to 200 years after Babel, there is something called the reforms of this king, Urukagina of Lagash, and they're written in Sumerian cuneiform. So they have a series of laws, so these are the Urukagina reforms. These are somewhere around the time, actually predating, if it's accurate, predating Abraham. This would be in the time of Job. So when we're looking at this, now these people, these are heathen who are writing down a system of laws. And then we could go on down. And I have in here the approximate birth of Nimrod, the founding of Babel, the founding of Egypt. And then you go down here. And now, during the life of Abraham, We've got the Code of Ur-Nammu in Mesopotamia. It's written in Sumerian cuneiform. And in that time, they standardized silver currency. They just basically weighed it, or they calculated it in a casita, the word used in Job and another place. But you think about this. So these people are writing. There's the Ur-Nammu law code. We go down a little bit farther. And in about the 1900s, around the time when Joseph was born, maybe just a little before, you got the Code of Eshnunna. And it's written in Akkadian cuneiform, a whole law code. You go just a little farther, you've got the Code of Lipit Ishtar, written in Sumerian cuneiform. And you go a little bit farther, and you've got down into the 1700s, you got the Code of Hammurabi, big name, Hammurabi of Babylon. It's written in Akkadian cuneiform. And these are all before the time of Moses. And then we say that the godly people never wrote anything. They didn't write. All they did, they just passed it down by oral transmission. And you know how oral transmission is. That's why they made that up. So if they say it was passed by oral transmission, they can tell you, see, well, oral transmission, it could have gotten mixed up along the way. And see, you can't really believe these stories that are in Genesis. You can't believe Genesis 1 through 4, and you can't believe the Genesis 5, and you can't believe about the flood. Oh, those are just, they were transmitted by oral transmission, and they just became legends and stories, and there was no real truth to them. That's why ungodly men made up the idea that nothing was ever written by the godly until Moses did it 2,700 years after creation. The heathen are writing. They're writing detailed law codes. They're teaching their children all kinds of things by their Akkadian and Sumerian cuneiform. They're doing all of this, but the godly never write. You know what? I used to be that dumb, but I'm not that dumb anymore. And if you look at a timeline and put your brain in gear, you don't have to be that dumb anymore yourself. And indeed, you need to be wise, and you need to be thinking and think in terms, why would Adam write? We'll deal with that later, but why would he write? Because his son, Cain, is going to leave with one of Adam's descendants as his wife. And Cain's going to take his people, and they're going to be alienated from Adam. They're not going to seek after God. They're going to be dependent upon Cain to tell them about God. He's going to be their progenitor, if you will. They're going to learn about God from a man who is in rebellion to God. And what is it going to do? And if you were Adam, would you just say, well, that's just the way it is. Let them go. Let them go. They'll all go to the lake of fire. That's all right. Let them go. Who cares? No, you'd be writing down something. You'd be trying to put down the things that they needed, that they would have to know so that they could know God accurately. And that's what Adam did in the first 4 chapters. And with that, we will stop today. So any thoughts, questions before we go? And by the way, you're welcome to send any questions by email, or that's the best way to do it. And it's the same old email as always, sheetsken@msn.com. You know, this world and this country we live in is going so far, so fast away from God. And it's happening all the way around the world. And it's because of the ignorance. God said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And if God said that, it is true, period. And yet we still keep rejecting. So, yes. Let's
I
see.
have a question.
Yes.
So if you do not accept, if you accept God in part, only in parts of your life, that is a violation.
Yes, it is.
That's correct.
Yes.
But you must accept him in whole, as he is, the
You can.
perfect person of God.
Yes. He is. I'm persuaded that many of us, and I would have to say
Yes.
myself personally, Vivian, I accepted God in part, and I was gradually learning and learning and learning, but I had many views of God that were wrong and needed to be changed. And
And that includes me as well.
I think it's virtually all of us. But see, that's the thing. That's why we have to learn, and we keep growing in knowledge, and we keep seeking. And I look back and I think, I mean, Vivian, I was saved in 1976.
Yes.
That's a long time ago. That's 46 years. And when I look back and I think, why did it take me so long to grow? And I can tell you why, to a large part. Some of it was just plain me, but some of it was because I subjected myself to the designs of men,
Yes.
preachers and teachers, and I let them decide what I was supposed to be like, instead of seeking to God myself. And wow. And in my life, do not ask my wife, but it wrought destruction after destruction. And it's even now, you keep carrying this baggage through life. But it's not to say that our there wasn't enough faith, shall we say, to save us. We did have that, but the thing is, to realize after we're saved, God intends us to grow and develop, and to be able to represent him accurately. And that's why I have to teach sometimes and say, I used to say this, but I don't say it anymore. So,
Yes.
you
also had a hand up.
also, yes. Did you have something, Eric?
Yes. So I just wanted to clarify something with the blessing and cursings.
Yes.
So based on what I'm getting from what you were saying, I guess in a nutshell, is the blessings and the cursings. It's not something that we, I guess, pray over somebody or that God puts on. It's basically you either follow God's system and you're blessed by it, or you're cursed by it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly right. Because think about it. When in the very first time, oh, I'm getting a little ahead of us, but that's good. When did Adam and Eve begin to fear God? They did not fear God after God came to them and told them of his judgments on them, so to speak. They feared God immediately upon violating his design, which tells us that he had already built into them, in this system of which they're a part, that when they violate, and see, this is another thing, when they violate, they would realize that in their violating his design, and because his design is an expression of his person, then they are also violating his person. And that's why they experienced the alienation from him and the fear that made them attempt to hide. And so it works perfectly. And I think the key is to think of blessing and cursing this way. The blessedness is, it's not just operating life the way God designed it. It's operating life the way God designed it in order to be able to interact with him personally, without any alienation. It's like you're like one of your children coming up to you when everything's great, and they come up and they just hug you and say, "Oh, Daddy, I love you so much." That, what a blessedness, not only for the person, the daddy, but also for the child. But on the other side, when there's been violation and the child is alienated, and the child can't do that, and the daddy can't bestow the blessedness on the child because the child rejects that, then it's, you might call that cursing. So we don't pronounce curses. And we're going to see when we get into the issue with, we have people talk about Noah pronouncing the curse on Ham after, he had been in his tent asleep and uncovered. And we say Noah pronounced, no. Noah didn't pronounce the curse. Noah simply recognized what was going to happen in the life of his sons. And one of the things, Eric, when Rebecca was mentioning earlier that there would be, there was completed action and there would be incomplete action, that basic statement there, what Noah said, it was incomplete action. He was pointing out, this is what's going to happen. He had already seen the character of his son, and he knew what that character was going to bring, not only in the life of his son, but in the life of his son's descendants. He wasn't pronouncing a curse on him. He was just recognizing what was already going to be, because he saw his son did not seek to walk in the way of God. And he knew what that was going to do. You have to stop and think. Noah was, he was over 600 years old. He had a pretty good bit of experience with God, and he walked with him. Wow, what a man. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess the other thing too is, so I'm guessing it's not scripturally correct then. So like, a lot of times when, like, I guess kind of what you're talking about when we pray, and maybe you pray over somebody and you ask the Lord to bless them and their family and that sort of thing. So that's, I guess, not scriptural then, or
No, I'd say that is very scriptural.
no?
The issue is, as a matter of fact, if you heard me pray sometime, if I was dealing with, shall we say, one of the most lost people in the world, or over a Muslim who hated Christ and me and everything else, I would pray that God would bless that person. But the content of the blessing that I am asking God to bring upon them is that God would bring into their life something that would help them to see that they need Christ. You see what I'm saying? And so they would see the truth, and that they would, and he'd bring the evidence into their life that would help them to accept the truth. And so see, in that way, but see, I'm praying because I know God's design for that person. God does not desire any person to be destroyed. He doesn't desire, that's not his desire. He didn't design it that way. It happens when people reject. But I ask him, God, would you bless that person with wisdom and knowledge and discernment so that they will see what is right and then walk in that way? And then when they do, then then that person and I together can pray for somebody else to be blessed in that way. But honestly, I never pray for God to curse anybody, because I know that if anyone rejects the design of God, there is only one result, and it's what we call the cursing. It's the failure, the destruction that comes as a result of trying to operate life according to our own way, but in contradiction to God's design. But I do, yeah. I pray for people. We just had a friend contact us yesterday, and he's his wife contacted us, and he's a pastor up in Virginia, and he's got COVID, very sick, and he's how old is he? 87, hon? 87 years old and very sick, and I never spoke a word aloud, but from my heart I said, "Oh God, you know what's best in this situation," and I'm asking God, bless in that situation. I don't have enough knowledge to know what is absolutely needed for your will, your design to be accomplished in their lives. But God, I know that this man, my brother, and his sister, his wife too, my sister, his wife too. She's not my physical sister, but you know what they need absolutely best in life. And would you just bless as you alone can do? And that's why many times, as a matter of fact, I typically sign my letters and emails and things, "May the Lord," and sometimes I'll say Yihya instead of Lord, all caps, because it's the same word. So I'll say, "May the Lord, the God who exists, bless you with an inescapable sense of the wisdom he has placed within your grasp." And that's my prayer for virtually everybody, because the wisdom, even for a lost person, it's right there before them. It's right within their grasp, and yet they will turn from it. And so my prayer is that they will perceive that wisdom and they will turn to God, and then they will receive Christ. So, yeah, I think we ought to pray for them that way, Eric. So we could just pray together for them, okay?
Okay. So basically what you were saying earlier was just not asking the Lord to bless something that is not of him or is not of his will.
Just like let's say, because I was challenged by a man in a church one time, because I would invite Jehovah Witnesses into my home, and then talk to them and turn it around, and then I become the witness and they become the hearer. And so this man said, "Oh, you don't ever let them come in your home." And I said, but think about this. These people, what do they need? They need the truth. Now, I'm not praying for God to bless them in their error so that their error grows. I'm asking God to bless them in a way that's going to correct their error and going to diminish the effects of their error. So we have this idea that we say blessing. It's like our words are going to bring blessing. No, you don't do that. If we ask God to bless something that is contrary to his design, then we're praying and there's no power to our prayer. But if we ask God to bless in such a way that he manifests himself to be exactly who he is in that situation, and that means he's going to be correcting errors, every error of every thought that exists. And so that's what I want. I want to see every error in the thinking of the people around me corrected. And that means I have to conduct myself as a proper representative. I have to act in likeness as God would act. And when we think about God in that, I always think about how the Lord Jesus Christ would act. So I have to try to conduct myself in that manner. Now, the bad part, Eric, is this. Here I am all these years, and I still don't do a very good job of it. So, but I'm looking forward to the day when he will allow me to leave this body and to come to be with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that helps me understand that better for sure.
Okay. Hey, and keep in mind, anytime if there's anything else, or just let me know, and we can discuss it, because what you're getting from me is a composite of all of these years that I've been studying the scripture, and especially since I decided, oh God, I've got to know you. I've got to know you as you are. When I started doing that, my perspective began to change, and it's changed dramatically. So it makes me very upset with the way I was for too many years, because for too many years I did what men preached and taught, because I wanted to be acceptable to those men. And now I realize being acceptable to men is often enmity with God.
Yeah, I think we've all fallen into that at least sometime in our life.
Oh yes. But the key is when we fall in, we say, oh God, I've fallen in. Help me out. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.